fall asleep. So yeah, it's interesting today because we have a few healthcare and pharma people, but I think one of the things that I really like about this type of conference is that it's such a mix of background, and you hear about all sorts of use cases from all sorts of industries. And in the pharmaceutical industry, I mean, we can go deep into complex challenges. I think you could do the same in every single of your industry. So I'll try to do my best to explain what is the problem actually that we are trying to solve. So not to talk about the solution yet, but what is the key challenge that we are trying to address. And I hope it's not going to turn too much into a lecture on what is drug R&D, but I'll talk a bit about that. So try to picture a world where your genome will be sequenced at birth. And imagine if something is wrong, we will fix it. We will fix your genome. Imagine during your life, your vital signs and your biomarkers will be continuously monitored so that if there is any problem, we can actually make some adjustment, like a suggest adjustment to your lifestyle, to your diet, to suggest that you take some food supplement, that you change some food that are not adapted to you, that will potentially trigger some problem. And if there is a problem happening, we will actually develop a drug that is just for you, so that's what we call personalized drugs. And then, with age, of course, things will start to go wrong. So imagine if we could regenerate your organs. And if it's not possible, then change your organ for cybernetics organ or organs coming from different species. So sounds like science fiction, right? Actually, it's not. So it's not science fiction. So if you look at genome sequencing, so 20 years ago, approximately, we did the first full genome sequencing. At that time, it was 2.4 billion. Now you can get it done for a few €100. And you can do it in a matter of days or even in a matter of hours. When the first time it took actually 10 hours, it was a huge undertaking. Some of you might remember the story of a company in California called Theranos. So Theranos was a very interesting startup that really wanted to use tech approach to healthcare. So long story short, it didn't work, but the idea was really good. So what they wanted to do is take a drop of blood and then look at every single markers you can have in this drop of blood. So like to look at hundreds of different markers. And they will do it while you're still healthy. Why will they do that? Because actually what we know is that a lot of the diseases that happen later in life start much earlier. So now there are a lot of papers saying that Alzheimer, for instance, you can see some of the markers 20 to 30 years before Alzheimer happens. And in general, there is always something you can do when you do very early intervention. And when you see the first symptom, it's already too late. So forget about Theranos. I mean, there are fantastic books and even series about this story. That was a scam. That was pretty bad for our industry. But people didn't forget about this idea to do continuous monitoring of your vital sign while you're still healthy, to be able to monitor whether everything is good or whether something might happen soon and we need to do some corrective measures. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with Spotify. So the CEO of Spotify, Daniel Ek, started a new healthcare subscription service. At the moment, I think it's available only in the Nordic country. It's called Neko Health. And what will happen in Neko Health, so you have this subscription service where you go to a clinic as you're healthy, every 6 months or something, and then they do a full body scan, and they take a lot of biomarkers, and then they are, at least they claim, that they are able to detect potential skin condition, cancer, cardiovascular disease, and more. So the concept of continuous monitoring of your health is something that is already happening. And actually, like a lot of you have this on your wrist, there are already a few FDA-approved markers now that are connected to the Apple Watch. Personalized medicine. So today, when we develop a drug, we don't really, most of the time, the drug is developed for, like the prototypical human being is a white Caucasian male between 20 and 40, and there is not necessarily a lot of diversity baked into how we develop and test drugs. However, there are already over a third of the drugs that were approved by the US FDA in 2022 that were personalized drugs. So drugs that are really tailored to you, to your genome. Last but not least, So this one is a bit crazy. But there are people, like it always existed, even in Greek mythology. People wanted to get younger. They wanted to drink this special water that will make them younger. Well, it's always in the US, this kind of story, but there are entrepreneurs in the US who are trying to get younger. So this guy actually has a very interesting story, Brian Johnson. You can read about him. He's spending millions every year to get younger, and he's claiming that his biological age now is approximately 30 years younger than his legal age because of all the tracking that he's doing, because of all the lifestyle adjustment that he's doing. So you can see that a lot of the things I was talking about are not science fiction, but they are already happening. So my name is Thibault Géoui. I'm working for a pharmaceutical company called Charles River Laboratory. Actually, it's not exactly a pharmaceutical company. It's called a contract research organization. So contract research organization is doing research, pharmaceutical research, on behalf of pharmaceutical companies. So what does that mean? We don't have our own drugs, but we help pharmaceutical companies that need to develop a drug to outsource part of the development. So we do the earliest part of drug development. We are a global company with 22,000 people across 21 countries, 150 facilities. We worked on almost every drug, so you can see 80% of the drug approved in the past 5 years, we worked on it. And if we look at certain therapeutic area, like neuroscience, we worked on 100% of those drugs. And we were founded in 1947. All those facts are actually interesting and important for what we will discuss about, because you can imagine that we generate a lot of data, and we have accumulated a lot of data over the years. So, as I said today, I want to talk about drug R&D. I will tell you why it's so hard. So I think it's important, as we are all discussing about our challenges, I really want to explain the specific challenges of the drug R&D and the workflow, and where it makes sense actually to apply AI. So what are the promises of AI? But what is the reality of AI? And the reality of AI is a bit of a mixed bag. There are things that are working really well already today, but the overall outcome for the industry is not great yet. So should we give up? I guess no. I mean, I'm going to spoil the end. No, we are not giving up, but we need to be realistic. So what is drug R&D? That's a very simple version. So there are approximately 30,000 diseases that have been identified. For every single disease, you really need to understand what is the disease biology. So in a sense, what is the underlying cause of the disease? Why do people get sick? So people are normally not sick, and then at some point, there is something that will trigger this disease. After that, you want to design something that will eventually be a drug. And the interesting fact is that there are approximately 5,000 drugs that are approved on the market to treat 500 diseases. And there are 30,000 known diseases. So it means that there is 29,500 diseases for which we don't have a drug. We only have ways to treat the symptoms, but we don't have ways to actually address the drug, to address the root cause of the disease. And a lot of them are called, rare disease or orphan disease. And of course, they don't impact a lot of people, in percentage. But still, in a country like Germany, you will have several thousands of people who don't have good therapeutic options. Once a drug, like a candidate, has been designed, it's tested in animal. And this is, of course, a cause for a lot of ethical debates, whether drugs should be tested in animal. And this is actually one of the things that artificial intelligence is already addressing, and I can say a few words about that. But why things are tested in animal? Because you want to find out, is the drug safe? What should be the dose of a drug? Is the drug working? And then once it's done, you're moving to human, and you need to figure out, okay, has what I've learned in the animal translating to human? So something that is not toxic in a mice, for instance, is it not toxic in human? And sometimes it's not the case. So assuming everything goes well, then you have a drug, and then you treat your patient. So that's the simple version. Now the more complicated version, where a lot of things can go wrong. So this is actually a real picture of the human metabolism. So it's an attempt at making a map of every single chemical reaction that goes on in your body to make you function the way you function. And whenever I look at this kind of thing, I'm always thinking, it's actually incredible that we are not sick all the time, because it's very, very complicated. And when you're developing a drug, so essentially, So I have animation in this thing, but I realize the animation is not working great. But when you're developing a drug, so essentially you try to identify part of this process that is not working, and you want to be able to develop a drug specifically against this part of a process. And then if we pick another part of a process here where everything is going fine, you really don't want this drug that fixes that does something wrong here. And I'll explain what this means. So essentially, I mean, this is your body. Your body is like a factory where here there is something, like that works fine, and then here there is a part of a process that doesn't work fine at all. And you want to be able to fix, this part of a process without impacting that part of the process. So here now, if we were to zoom in on this big map, so imagine like all those, like bubbles and connections are chemical reactions that are happening in your body to make your body function. So here what you want is to develop a drug that will specifically target that. However, what's really complicated is that sometimes we don't understand well enough this map. So we have blind spots on this map. And imagine a factory where you have multiple conveyor belts, and the drug that you develop is supposed to block the conveyor belt, but then you might have a parallel conveyor belt, and you put this drug, and you realize, it doesn't really impact the disease. It doesn't really cure the disease, simply because the biology is more complex than what you understand. And this is actually another really, really good use case for AI today, understanding the complexity of those maps. So trying to go into these microscopic things that are happening in our body and try to understand, try really to clarify the map and to uncover those different routes in our body. And as I said, what you don't want is this drug to impact another part of the process that here, like the green box, everything is fine here, but sometimes you have drugs that will target multiple areas and you actually don't know why. And this is actually typically when you have a side effect. So when you're reading the manual, like the label in a drug, you say, I'm taking this drug because I have a high blood pressure, but then you have a list of side effects long like that saying, well, it might treat your high blood pressure, but then you will have nausea, you will have headaches, you will have all sorts of things. Why is this happening? Because drugs are targeting multiple parts of the body, and no drug is perfect. So this is actually a picture of, if we go back, like if we look one of these geometrical shape, in reality it looks like that, this green thing. And now there are tools, artificial intelligence tools. So you might have heard about something called AlphaFold, actually the third version that was developed by a subsidiary of Google, DeepMind. They created a tool that can solve this kind of structure in a matter of minutes. So I've done my PhD actually in this field. It took me 5 years to create a shape like that. So now my PhD is not worth a lot because there are tools that can do that extremely accurately and extremely fast. The thing that you have, like the globular shape in the middle, this is a drug. So here what you have is that you have one of these chemical factory of the body with a drug inside. And here, these are already a few examples of AI use case. So an AI use case to actually find out what this thing looks like, because once you know what it looks like, then you can design something that will go inside and block it. And the other use case is actually to design the drug that will go inside it and block it. Why is it so difficult to design a drug? Okay, another animation that doesn't work? Yes. The potential space for chemical compound is actually 10 to the power of 60. So the potential number of things that will look like a drug is 10 to the power of 60. So just to give you an idea of how big is this number, so there are approximately 7.5 10 to the 18 number of grain of sand on Earth. So don't ask me how people calculated that. I'm sure it's an entry question when you apply to Amazon or Google, but 10 to the power of 18 grain of sand on Earth. 10 to the power of 24 stars in the observable universe, and 10 to the power of 80 atoms in the universe. So this number is so large that you cannot make all those things. I mean, that would be larger than Earth, larger than, big part of the universe. You can't even make them virtually. It's impossible. It's just too large. So the drug R&D has often been referred to as finding a needle, but the needle will be like very, very tiny inside a haystack, but the haystack will be the size of a universe. And until recently, we didn't have digital tools to do that. So we had to do experiment to be able to figure that out. And what AI is doing, or what AI is promising to do, is to actually accelerate this process. And we have a few examples of where it is accelerating it, how it is accelerating it, but where also there are still bottlenecks. So the other analogy, because we love to use analogy in drug R&D, the other analogy is that we describe drug R&D as a Sisyphean undertaking. So for those who are not too familiar with Greek mythology, so Sisyph was a Greek king who did something that kind of pissed off the kings, the gods. So he was cursed. He was cursed to live forever and to push a boulder on top of a mountain. And as soon as he will reach the top of the mountain, the boulder will come crush him, and then he will have to do that over and over again. So drug R&D is quite similar to that, because if you look at the numbers in drug R&D, so I think there are not a lot of industry where your baseline, the average number, is we fail 95% of the time. So 95% of the time when we start a project, we know we will fail it. So it's better to play lottery sometimes than to invest in pharma company. We were talking about pharma investment during lunch. Takes 12 years to develop a drug. On average, it costs 2.5 billion. And if you look at the largest companies, so the top 16 companies, they spend on average 6.2 billion to develop a drug. And this curve is actually the evolution of the productivity of the industry. So if you look at, so here on the y-axis is the number of drugs produced per $1 billion, and here on the x-axis is the years. From 1950 to the year 2000, the productivity or the cost of developing a drug has increased by 80 times if you correct it by inflation, 80 times. And there are a number of reasons why this is the case. So okay. Oh, yes, and I'll go to the reason in the next slide. So what we see, just to be completely fair, is that in the past few years, the productivity seems to go up again. So people have been very quick at saying, hey, this is AI. AI is saving us. That we can't say now, but it might be, I hope, but we don't know. So what are the reasons for what we call the Ahrum's law? So you all know the Moore's law, like the doubling of the power every 18 months in the semiconductor industry. So pharma, we call it the Ahrum's law, because this is exactly the opposite. So it's getting worse every 18 months. So the reason for that, there are a few, and it's taken from a very nice, very interesting publication. So you'll see that if you're interested in the slide that we will share. One of the reasons was that we've been developing drugs for a long time, so there are things that we call blockbusters. So the blockbusters are like those gold standard drugs that have been developed already some time ago. And when after their patent expires, so they become generic. And improving on a blockbuster when it's a generic is very difficult. So it's very difficult to make a drug better than that. The things that were simple, so the low-hanging fruit have already been addressed. So we already worked on it. Regulation, I think like in many industries, because of a number of scandals, health scandals, drugs that did more damage than good. So the regulation is becoming harder. Also, we are in an industry where we think that throwing more money at a problem will actually solve the problem, and sometimes it makes it worse. But my favorite two are the next one, actually. We actually have a broken data ecosystem. So companies really have accumulated a lot of data during the years, but a lot of companies didn't fix the underlying data system. And the last one also is that we have a tendency to use brute force approaches, meaning that we will industrialize some processes and really improve those processes. Those processes will produce even more data, but back to the broken data ecosystem, then it just makes the whole problem worst. And as we get more data, instead of facilitating decision-making, it makes decision-making a bit more complicated. So here it's from a very recent McKinsey report where you look at the investment and adoption in AI over the past few years. So you see that it's been increasing constantly, especially with the advent of generative AI. So now all the industry are investing in AI. But now if you look at different industries, so it's a bit tiny. So technology, energy, financial service, media, blah, blah, blah. So at the bottom of the pile, you have healthcare and pharma. So we are investing, but compared to the other industry, we are much more cautious. So we are investing less. So now we're investing less, but we are still investing a lot. Don't get me wrong. So if you look at the number of papers published of AI in biology, it's 46,000 papers since 2022. 46,000 papers. There are 158 AI-based pharma programs already since 2022. 73 compounds are in the clinic, and between 2012 and 2022, 116 billion have been invested. And again, 2022 is pre-ChatGPT, so you can imagine that this number now is much higher. But if we were to compare the traditional drug R&D with the AI-driven drug R&D, the outcome today, we cannot say that it has been successful. So I'll give you two examples, because there are actually only 2 or 3 examples of compounds that were developed using AI that went to the clinical phase and they failed. So few companies did that, and what happened is that they went through those first steps in 18 months, and then when they arrived in human, this is where things didn't work. And in the end, our goal in the pharmaceutical industry is to make sure that we have compounds that show efficacy and that are not toxic when we reach the human phase. So if you improve, if you develop AI models or AI tools that are speeding up everything here, but that fail here, it's kind of pointless. If I was, and I think I am, a glass half full type of person, I will say, well, they did this whole process in 18 months, and normally, if you use a traditional R&D approach, it takes 6 years, and it also fails. So in a way, they failed, but faster, so which is already a win. Now, just to be clear and also fair with those companies, it's only 3 examples that we have today. So it's difficult, it's not really statistically representative. And as you can see here, so there are quite a lot more compounds that now have reached those critical stages. So this year and next year, we'll see a lot of examples of things that will help us to say, hey, is AI really revolutionizing drug R&D? Are we much more successful now in those phases? We don't know yet. But we can't really wait for that to start to invest, and I think everyone is investing. So now let's look at what's really happening in the industry. So our industry for many years has been an industry that was very linear, where I'm a scientist, I have a scientific question, I do experiment, produce lots of data, I test the things in vivo, and then I answer my scientific question, and then I move on. And then my data, I keep them somewhere. So I have so much anecdote on that. I was discussing with a colleague last time saying, hey, you generate terabytes of data, with those very sophisticated experiments. What do you do with the data? And they were like, well, we can't keep them because the cloud is full. I'm like, what the fuck does that mean, the cloud is full? So you can see, we still have a long way to go sometime between the scientific strategy and then the AI strategy and the data strategy. And this one is kind of a bad example. Of course, there are many other areas of the business where things are much more aligned. But I'm hearing that, in so many pharma companies I'm discussing with, where they still have those problems of, scientists not having yet a data mentality. But what we see, and I think this is the thing that I find positive, is that a number of pharmaceutical companies now recognize that data is the new currency. It's really the thing that is important. So now they are re-engineering their processes and imagining themselves as data companies, and they really create an engine to create data and to have data at the center, so that when they create data for an experiment, they also know that this data will be reused by someone else. So you need to put in place a lot of processes. So we are really moving from, the biggest shift I see is we are moving from an industry where we do a lot of doing to an industry where we do a lot of learning. So we learn from the experiment, we learn from the data. So I'm sure you can hear from my accent, I'm French. So for me, everything has a food analogy. So I was at a conference recently, and French people, they're like magnets. So they found themselves, and we ended up at a table. We were talking over lunch, and then what we were talking about food while eating food. That's what we do, French. So I think, I like to liken my AI models to food. So when you're training your AI models, just like when you're preparing food, what is the most important? Your ingredients. And the challenge sometimes is that Well, the data that you are using are the data that you scavenge. These are the data that you prepared many years ago that you have around. And don't get me wrong, I mean, if you're a good cook, you can still do something, well, maybe not with that, but you can still hope to do something good with the scavenged data, but it will take a lot of work. I mean, everyone heard, 80% of the time of data scientists is spent cleaning up the food. Now imagine if you were like a three-star chef. Three-star chef will not use this thing, but will go to the farmer's market and take the best possible ingredients. So one of the things that we see also, one of the trends we see in our industry is the concept of intentional data generation. So you generate data to learn and to train your models. So of course, it's a combination of several things. It's a combination of the things that you have lying around, but it's also a what if I could dream the ideal data set and create this data set for my models. So now, there are lots of potential use cases, and I won't have time to go through all those use cases where AI can be used and is already used today. This week, I'm doing a workshop where we've been talking to over 50 scientists across the business, and we've collected all the potential use cases, and we are ranking them now. And I think it's similar to a lot of things that I've seen in other presentations. What will have the biggest impact? What is the challenge? And now we are trying to see how can we piece together those different things so that we actually have a real impact on what makes sense is the success in the clinics. It's 1 minute? Oh, shit. Okay, I'll speed up. So I think one thing that is important, as I said, one of the things that we see in our industry is that there is a lot of siloed AI, and it kind of mimics, the org chart. Hey, I'm improving in this department, that department, whereas in startup, things are much better connected. So what we try to do in my company is kind of combine a big pharma approach with a startup. And if you're interested, I have this thing now. It's a program that we call Logica, where we are actually combining what we think is the best of both worlds. We also have tools that we use to communicate with our clients. It's called Apollo. Apollo so far was a digital platform that was better than what we had a few years ago, where it was mostly based on Excel. So now people can see these are the clinical observation. But then what we are doing already today, we are experimenting, of course, with chatbot integrated into that. So it's not yet. So let me just go to the. So it's not yet something that is launched. But now you can imagine we deliver that to our client, and instead of letting them just go through, big tables, now they can ask the question. These are pretty low-hanging fruit use case, but these are things that are working today and that we can implement today. So let me just finish now. I'll go to, yeah. So where is it going? So that's the last slide. What we see in our industry is that there are a couple of trends that are happening that I think are very important, that are facilitated by AI. So one is disintermediation. What does it mean? The disintermediation means that scientists, in our case, the scientist is the end user, now has access to tools that let them talk to the data in a way that they couldn't before. It's not because you're a life scientist that you're good at IT or at using Python. You're not. So in the past, you had to work with a data scientist. Now you have tools that let you interact with the data much better. What we'll see also is different type of AI coming together, so the conventional AI and LLM coming together, and then those AI coming together in the physical world where the AI is controlling automation as well. For those interested, I can talk about it quite a lot because I think this is one of the fascinating things. And the goal is really to make sure that everything we do translates to human, so that when we develop a drug in the lab, this drug actually works in human, and that we can embrace the complexity of biology, because for many years, and I'll finish on that, science had a reductionist approach. Why we had a reductionist approach? Because the complexity of our system was so big that we had to make it simple. And as we made it simple, of course, there are things that we had to overlook because they were just too complex for our approach. Now, we can embrace complexity using AI, and I think for me, this is certainly the biggest hope as we are tackling very complex workflows. Thank you very much.